Hi folks. So this is kind of a two-part thing. A lot of you were working on part one yesterday, and you might be working on part one today. That's a-okay. Sorry, I'm not there to help out a bit. So the idea is that we want to create something where almost like a start button or a start screen. I want you to start thinking about the modularity. So the idea of object orientation is that we can split the program into functions, and then you could put those functions wherever you need. So like, for example, you made the kind of character game, and the idea of kind of objectifying it would be to make a character function that you would call in the draw function. So the draw function's built in. It's a constant loop. It's kind of like your main work area. Anything you put in there will get drawn. It gets pulled into the draw function effectively. So what happens is if you make functions to draw stuff, then inside the draw function, you can call those functions, but you can also use a conditional, and it makes it easier to maybe not draw something if you don't want to. So you technically could do this all in the draw function, but then you'd end up with a massive if statement and all sorts of places where you could easily get issues. Whereas instead, if you have a function for each thing you need to do, then you can make a pretty simple looking if statement in your draw function, and it's easier to track your code and follow along. So the idea of part one, I gave you this. So a couple things on here. This is a state variable, so remember the state variable technically means nothing to the computer, but it's something that means something to you. And you can use this in if statements to determine what you want to do. So it's determining the state of something so you know what to do to respond. So in this case, we have button pressed equals false. That's a state variable storing what you want the button's value to be. Secondly, I brought in objects again. So we had the idea of an object. My button equals, and then the idea of an basic idea of an object is you can store a bunch of variables together. So in here, what you see is my button is the object, and inside my button we have an x variable, a y variable, a w variable, h variable, and a color variable. So then later on we can say my button.x, my button.y, my button.w, my button.h. In this case, if you didn't catch on to it, x and y are x and y, w is width, and h is height, color is blank. The reason I have these all as 0 and blank up here is it's not as easy to just declare an object. So this is creating the object and creating the spaces to store values, but those are just dummy variables for now. And then what you'll see is the initial setup happens in setup here. You want to do this because you need to be after the canvas is created, so you have your width and your height. The width and the height are what you want to base it off of to like center it and stuff. And you could do this differently too. You could just say it's somewhere, but this lets you make it actually centered. Now this looks a bit weird. The reason the x and the y are width divided by 2 minus the button width divided by 2. The reason for this is when you draw a rectangle or a shape, the xy coordinate of it is the top left corner. So we needed to subtract half of the button's width and half of the button's height in order to make the xy coordinate center. You could get away with doing this without these. It's just you'll notice your button will be slightly offset. So if this is confusing you, get rid of it for now. Just have width divided by 2, height divided by 2. But if it is not confusing you, then awesome. So in here, what I'm saying is the width is 120, the height is 40, the x is going to be center, y is going to be center, and for now the color is red. So these just set the initial values before the draw function starts running. Now, when we get down here, in the draw function, what you'll see is we have background 220, so just white, And then we have an if statement here. If the button pressed equals false, you're going to draw the button. So this means if the button is pressed state is false. If it's not pressed, the button will be drawn. You could do all sorts of stuff with this. You could switch it so the button pressed state, instead of the draw button, you can make it so the color changes. But right now what happens is until the button pressed turns true, the button won't be drawn. Or when the button press turns true, the button won't be drawn. So this is just blocking the fact that the button pressed will cause the button to disappear, because it won't draw once button pressed is true. Built-in function mouse pressed, we've used it before. In here what we have is, I just gave you the logic for the X side. You need to still do the Y side. So in this you have to do nested if. You have to do this if for the X, which I gave you, and then on the inside you need to do the same idea for the Y. So for the X, you see I'm saying if mouse X is greater than the button's X value, and if mouse X is less than the button's X value plus the button's width. So remember, top left corner. So if the mouse X is between the button's X value and the button's X value plus the button's width value, that's what this is saying. If it's less than them combined and more than just the X, that means it's within the boundaries of the button. So the top left corner is button X, the top right corner is button X plus button W. So if that's true, that means we're within the width. You need to do the same thing for Y, and this will determine if it's within the height. And if you do those two things together, you know that you've clicked within the space of that button. Because we're using the variables and not hard numbers, this makes it dynamic, which means you can put the button wherever you want and this code will continue to work. And then if those both happen, I just say button pressed is true. So lastly, down here you can see I made a whole new function. You can make any function you want. This is just like Python in that sense. So in this function you can see draw button, and all it does is it fills with whatever is stored in button color. So in button color you either have to store an RGB value or you have to store actually no, you have to store, because of the way I set it up, you have to store quotation color. So again, quotation blue, quotation red, quotation green. So it's filling with that, and then rectangle is being drawn with X, Y, WH. So when we preview this, what you'll see is, sorry, I have to use live server on my computer, I didn't install that. So what you'll see is we have this little red box. And again, I haven't set up the Y. I want you to set up the Y part of that click. But what you'll see is when I move my mouse over here, if I click on this side, nothing happens. If I click on this side, nothing happens. But this corner is button X, and this corner is button X plus H. So if I click between this, it's going to recognize that I'm between them, and it's going to make button pressed equal true. Once button pressed equals true, the if statement prevents that draw function from happening. So once you get that logic set up, make another function. It could be whatever you want, but maybe function scene or scene2. And have fun, draw something. You could put your character in there. You could do a second rendition of your character. You could put whatever you want. But the idea is, it doesn't need to be fancy or complicated. The idea is I want you to make it so if the button is pressed, it switches from drawing the button to drawing that scene. So you already have the first part pretty much there. You have to add this logic in for the Y value, and then you're good. Now what I want you to do is make a second scene and do this and make it show up. So you're using these functions to make it so in the draw function you can control what actually gets drawn at what time. And again, the state variable in this one is true and false, but you could also make it 0, 1, 2, 3, and then you could have scene 1, 2, 3, 4. There's all sorts of stuff you can do, and this is kind of how you sort of would build up a game type thing in this. Lastly, if you want to explore it, there is a text block in P5.js, and you can find it in the reference. If you want to explore putting this in there, you could put text on top of your button, or you could use text wherever in there. But it is in here. It uses, oh, interesting, it's emoji there. I believe it defaults to just black, but there is a way to do color change. It might be stroke. You might want to, I'm pretty sure it is stroke. Text is weird. Text is literally stroke. So if you increase the stroke weight, it'll make a heavier font. If you change the stroke color, it'll change the stroke to the text color. And then in here, all you have is text, and then comma x comma y. So it's where you're storing it. And you can also use fill. So actually fill is probably the better. So there's text size, there's all sorts of stuff. It shows you all of it on the reference. So if you want to explore adding text to this, feel free. Text is there, jump on it. So your goal today, if you haven't already, get the button to function. That is your first goal, is get that button to function. So finish the logic for the y value here, remove true here, and put in what you need for your y function. And then once you have your button function in where if you click your button, it works, then think of a scene 2. Just put something in scene 2. And if you don't know what to do, draw something similar to your character, maybe add something else. You could start doing yes or no questions. Technically, this leads into, you could do like a choose your own story thing, but this is the basic goal. I want you to have 2 scenes, one with a button, one with a second scene, and the button controls when that scene shows up. Okay. I plan to be back tomorrow, so when I get back tomorrow, we'll chat, and we'll see how this goes. We might change gears if we are feeling like this is a bit too hard still. I have a secondary plan if we need. So, anywho, you can try to message me if you have questions, but I will try to be back tomorrow and we can work through it there. Have a good day, folks.